How's everyone doing? Good, yeah? We're in for a real treat tonight. Bruce Davidson is one of our most important and one of the most influential photographers, American photographers of the last half of the 20th century. And it's a real pleasure and honor to have him here and have a chance to hear his thoughts on a lifetime of photography. And I'm going to share just a little bit of some words of introduction about Bruce. His work has a real deep humanist side to it. There's a love of people and a concern for the human condition. And I think this is going to be the sort of resounding theme through the evening and as we look at photographs that he's made over the last 60 years. After serving in the military, Davidson had a chance to meet Henri Cartier-Bresson in France. And the reason I'm starting there is because the great master Cartier-Bresson was an influence, as you have now been, to these next generations. And it was through Cartier-Bresson that Bruce was introduced to Magnum Photos, the agency. The great thing about the Strand is that there's how many miles of books? Lots of miles of books and lots of miles of art and photography books. And the chance to talk with artists and celebrate recent publications is a total joy for me, and it's a joy for all of us. We're all here because of that. And the book tonight that we're celebrating is simply called Bruce Davidson Survey. It's really the first full survey of your work. It was published by Fundación Mapfre, which is an amazing Spanish exhibition program. They have a great publishing program, and then also co-published with Aperture here in New York. And it's a comprehensive collection of over 50 years of your critically acclaimed work. And as I mentioned, it's the first single volume full survey, which is a great sales point, that it's if you're going to own one great Davidson book that covers his whole career, this is it. I want to mention that you really prize your relationships with your subjects above all else, and it's truly evident in your work. From his deeply moving documentation of the civil rights movement to the in-depth study of one particular block in Harlem, East 100th Street, you have immersed yourself fully in your projects, which have sometimes taken several years to complete. This survey, as I mentioned, was created in conjunction with an exhibition, which will travel Europe for a couple of years before it finds its way to the United States. And hopefully we'll have a chance to see it here in New York or somewhere nearby. In addition to the work on the Civil Rights series and your work in Harlem, the book includes a well-known series titled Brooklyn Gang. There are photographs from your Subway series and a project titled simply Central Park. And that doesn't get us even to the present time, and there's work that has continued all the way. Some recent photographs of work that you've done in California. I want to mention that you were born in Oak Park, Illinois, and in a hospital in Oak Park, Illinois, and that you became a member of Magnum, the legendary artist-owned agency, in 1958. You received a Guggenheim in the 60s, and you also received several National Endowment for the Arts awards over the various years. One of the great achievements for any artist is to see their work collected by public institutions along with great private institutions. And your work has been both exhibited and collected in some of the world's greatest institutions, including MoMA, SF MoMA. It's been exhibited around the world at the Smithsonian. And we're very pleased to say that it's also been exhibited here in New York in many venues, including Aperture, which is one of the great photography organizations based here in New York. So today we're going to, we have a slideshow, and we're going to use the slideshow format and the photographs as a means to just have a conversation about the work. And I don't know if you can you see the pictures from here? Is there a way that we can, does that help? Okay. I think, let me just make sure that I have the power with this thing. Where do I aim it? Right here. Okay. So this is a self-portrait.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have to hold the mic up. Yeah.
In my hand. Oh,
It is.
okay. Can you hear? All right. My military service had two parts. One, a year in the Arizona desert, and two, they sent me to a special group in Paris. In Paris, I was a friend, a fellow soldier who was French, who said that his mother invited me for lunch in Montmartre. They lived in Montmartre, and after lunch, I went to the balcony, and down below on the street was a very elderly woman hobbling up, and I said, "Do you know that woman?" And he said, "Yes, she lives upstairs in a garret. She claims that she knew Gauguin, Renoir, and Sauternes," and he introduced me to her, and then it was like love at first sight. Every weekend I had a pass. I had a scooter. I would visit her, and so that's a picture, self-portrait of me and the widow Montmartre's atelier.
In her home there. So how old are you at this point?
I think I'm 26, maybe.
And in your bio, you talk about having photographed from the age of 10.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I was a lousy basketball player, and we had a hoop on a garage,
Mm-hmm.
and I was waiting to get back into the game.
Mm-hmm.
When my friend Sammy, a little older than I was, took me and said, "Do you want to see developing?" And I said, "What's developing?" He said, "I'll show you. Come with me." And I went into this dark, dank, Midwestern
Basement.
right, and there was a flash of light, and I saw that he put a piece of paper and some water, and an image slowly appeared.
Mm-hmm.
That hooked me, and ran home to my mother and asked if she would empty out my grandmother's jelly closet, and I would write Bruce's shop, and that got me going.
Right. How did you get your first camera?
It was, I would say, my first real camera was for when I was bar mitzvahed. It was what I studied for,
Mm-hmm.
and it was an Argus A2, 35 millimeter,
Mm-hmm.
a real camera. It wasn't a box camera, and I would go all over taking pictures and developing them in my dark room.
And this is all in the Chicago environment.
Yeah, Oak Park. Yeah.
And so when you went off to college, you first went to RIT.
Yeah.
And was that to study photography, or was that?
Well, it was the only college that would take me.
Because you didn't have a basketball scholarship.
It was a photography school. It was the only one in the United States. But I happened to be very good at chemistry and physics. I wasn't very good at math, but I was good at intuition.
Right.
Intuition. So that began maybe technically I was exposed.
But even by the time that you had gotten to RIT, you had studied with somebody named Herbert Matter. Is that right?
That was at Yale.
That was that was later than at Yale.
Yeah, it was later. I was very fortunate. Oak Park was a small town then,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a Mr. Cox who had a studio, and he invited me in, and he taught me how to make dye transfer color prints, and he built a strobe for me.
Right.
He was a real gentleman Southern guy, and I was his son.
Right, right. So by the time you went to RIT for a couple of years, and then you transferred to Yale.
Yeah.
And studied photography and art.
Well, that's right. But there was a part there where I was at Eastman Kodak. I was an illustrator, and it was boring as hell.
Right. What did they have you illustrate?
I plastic objects that Kodak was making at that time,
Right.
like a fan.
Right.
And it was 8 by 10.
So you were shooting 8x10.
Yeah,
These plastic objects.
yeah.
And what I'm getting around to is, by the time you got out of college, how familiar were you with all of these different photo processes? You had shot 4x5, you had
Yeah.
shot 8x10, you'd
Yeah.
done dye transfer prints, you'd
Yeah.
done 35 millimeter black
Yeah.
and white.
Well, you can look at my studio notebooks that I kept them, and and it shows how I manifested an idea
Right,
technically.
right,
So, yeah, that was that. I worked a summer at Eastman Kodak. I was an illustrator, but as I said, wasn't me, and I left and joined forces at Yale University.
So when you were at Yale, the sense of using the handheld camera, did that start to feel like the voice, the tool that would express your voice the best?
Well, for my thesis at Yale, I've decided to photograph the Yale football team, but not the game. Back at halftime, they beat up very badly. I was right there, and when I went into Coach Oliver to get permission to photograph the Yale football team, he said, "Kid, you're much too small for Yale football." I said, "I'm not going here as an athlete. I'm going here as a photographer." So he gave me permission. I never photographed the game. The game wasn't interesting to me.
Right.
But the tension that was from athletes that were getting beaten up,
Right.
really, that really predicted the way I would work.
Interesting. You then mentioned, so when you were in the military, you went to Arizona. And privately, you mentioned to me there was the project. It's in this book, and there was you were stationed at Fort Huachuca, right?
That's right.
And which is south of Phoenix, I believe,
Yeah.
in the Sonoran Desert.
It's in nowhere land.
The nowhere Sonoran Desert.
It's a desert.
Yeah.
7,000 feet.
So sort of high
yeah.
desert. And one day when you were hitchhiking into town,
Yeah.
you describe what happened.
Well,
then.
what happened was I would try to hitchhike in town to see the bullfights
Right.
in Nogales, Mexico.
Right.
And I was looking for a ride, and this Model T Ford appeared. Chuck, 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 right down to me. And I waved him, and it was an elderly man driving it. I said, "I'm fascinated by your automobile." We got to know each other, and he took us back to his home,
Right.
which was like a motel for miners. The mines had all closed.
Right.
These two were kind of remnant of that era. So I stayed with them
Right.
on weekends.
So
And-
can I interrupt? For those of
Yeah.
you who might think that Bruce isn't as young as when Model Ts were first invented, he is younger than that. So the Model T was a thing from the past.
Oh yeah,
This is in the
but
50s.
It was present in the.
It was present
that's
there.
desert.
Right. So they took you in.
They took me in
Right.
because I was a GI.
Right.
You know, when I told them I was a soldier at the base, they lit up.
And what was it why did you switch from wanting to go see bullfights to wanting to spend time
It
with this
reached
couple?
me, and also I had an experience where the bull jumped over the fence, and I had to jump over the fence away from him.
Right. Right.
So
Did that turn into a recurring nightmare?
After that happened, the bullfights were not interesting to me.
I want to get to. So here's the car. This is the photo. Was this sort of on the first meeting, or did you make this?
Yeah, the first meeting, and they drove me up to where his motel was,
Right.
and and the rest over a period of weeks on weekends, whenever I could,
Right.
I'd visit the walls.
The walls.
The feeling of the desert, the abandonment, the fact that they're remnant themselves to an era that's gone. That's all sort of intrigued me. I didn't know, I couldn't articulate all that, but I could felt it.
You mentioned to me that this project sort of set the course or set the tone for Can you describe that? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm working intimately. I'm looking, I'm watching, I'm listening, and I'm photographing that which was an era that was dying as they were in their 90s.
Right.
So that took me.
There's a quote that I want to read from you. So it's a really great quote that I want to get out here at the sort of beginning of the evening. You said once, "I often find myself an outsider on the inside, discovering beauty and meaning in the most desperate of situations." What do you mean by an outsider on the inside?
Well, I wasn't a social worker.
Right.
I was a photographer. I was a boy with a camera. And I just responded to the mood of...
Josh wants you to hold it a little closer.
To the mic?
Yeah, there you go.
I responded to the atmosphere, and that charged me on. And the way I work in a kind of series, in that I keep back, I keep looking, I keep being, and trying to understand what I'm doing.
What are you trying to understand? Is there an aspect of... Are you trying to tell a story?
Situation. I try to understand the truth of the situation. It doesn't matter what it is. Right now I'm working in an era of dead animals. And I should say it was a Museum of Natural History. And I love working in there because if I make a mistake, if I didn't get it, it won't move. It'll be there. It's really there for me, whenever I want to be there.
Right.
And so I kind of erase what I did. I make it bigger.
Right.
Anyway, that's how I am.
Gotcha. Okay, let's look at some more pictures here.
Yeah.
So this is one of your more well-known images.
Yeah. So this is the very first time I met him. He was about to go back into the tent with the music is playing and whatnot.
What was his name again?
Jimmy Armstrong.
That's right.
And I just stood there. I didn't want him to clown. I just wanted him to smoke a cigarette, and put himself together to go into the world under the tent. Okay, so I guess I made a print for him, and I came back, and we became fast friends. Although I photographed everything you can imagine at the circus, I kept focused on Jimmy.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, at the end, when I was leaving the circus, I bought him a little Yashica twin lens reflex camera that could fit in his hands.
Oh, right.
Rolleiflex would have been too big.
Right.
So we corresponded for a couple of years. After that, he would get his route card to me somehow, so I knew he was going to be in such and such a town.
Right.
And that's the way I work. That's the way I live. That's who I am.
Right.
I don't even know who I am, but I know who I am.
It's probably true for all of us.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so I think this now shifts into Brooklyn Gangs.
Brooklyn Gang, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I had read in one of the newspapers that a ramble or gang fight, or two gangs, happened, and there were some injuries.
Right.
So I went there.
A rumble.
Right. I went there, offering my services. I took pictures for their lawyers with bandages.
Right.
Okay. And so that started me off, going back every weekend or every day to be with them, not to talk to them, but to observe them, to feel them, to understand their depression and potential violence.
So these kids were teenagers.
Yeah, they were 15 years old.
And you were only 10 years older than them at this point,
right? And I was thin.
Right.
Yeah, I could have been
One of them.
One of them.
And where were you living at this point?
I was living in a one-room garret in Greenwich Village with a mattress on the floor, a dying chiffonera tree, and a darkroom kitchen combination with a sliding door and I could print all night and frozen candy bars. So I lived like a monk.
Right. Do monks eat frozen candy bars?
Yeah. Some. Not with nuts. They don't like the nuts.
So this you have a long history of book publishing.
Aperture.
Aperture was one of the, was that did they publish your first book? What was your first book?
It was Bruce Davidson photographs. Bob Edelman put that together. Yeah.
And when was that? That was in the...
That was 78.
78.
And I had a show at ICP at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Subway was published by Aperture first.
Yes.
In 1980.
I'm not sure the dates.
But this project then, the Brooklyn Gang Project, which was from the late 50s into the 60s when you were making the work, wasn't published until 1998, I think it was, by Jack Woodhead.
Possible.
How did that project? What happened to it at the time? You made a lot of photographs. You spent a lot of time with those kids, and then was it in a magazine? Was it you were just doing it for yourself? How did that whole project evolve?
I think Esquire published it, and they hired Norman Mailer to meet the gang.
How did that go?
Well, they weren't too impressed.
Right.
And that's true. So, but the important, that's Bobby. He's a tough little kid.
Right.
And very smart, but very destructive. He didn't learn to read or write until he was 40 years old. No one knew that he couldn't read or write. He hid that.
Hid it.
So this is the first picture I took once I got permission from the gang.
Right.
And Bobby said that there's a very good picture on the roof. On the roof, a lot of aerials.
Right.
And I said to myself, I don't know this guy. I'm not going up on any roof with someone I don't know. But I said, if I don't do it, go with him. I'm not going to get their respect.
Right.
So I did. Terrified that he was going to rob me and throw me over but he didn't. Actually, it was a very good picture that he was presenting me. Yeah.
It was like an offering.
Yeah, it's an offering, exactly. But what I didn't see or didn't choose to see was their predicament, how poor the parents were, how alcoholic was in there, the struggle to survive. And I only found this all out because Bobby, 40 years later, called me and wanted to meet. And I said, okay. And my wife, my dear wife, she said, you're not going to any gang leader without me. So I went her, and he really respected her. So for the next several months, years, he would come over on Saturday. I would make sure that I was in the darkroom printing. And a story evolved, the truth of living.
Right.
Like his mother had 7 children, was alcoholic, poor, and would have oatmeal 3 times a day.
Right.
So that part
you didn't know at first.
No, I showed the sexy part.
Right.
The gang
right.
and all that stuff. But now I want to join the two experiences.
So
permission.
Right. So Bobby, as you mentioned, visited and essentially Emily did his oral history, took his oral history down.
Yeah.
And he told his story.
Right.
And he has now since passed away. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But a book was published in I think, Emily, I think it was 2012. Is that right?
Is that the Woody?
Which is his oral history along
Yeah,
with some of your photographs.
Right.
And the Strand might have those available as well. But
Yeah.
so you mentioned that you want to bring that oral history and some of these photographs together in a bigger
Yeah,
publication.
right.
Right.
Some of the, for instance, he was describing his mother,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, "Gee, there's a picture in the contact sheets that fulfill that description." And soon enough, it was his mother
Wow.
crossing the street, smoking a cigarette, tiny little tough person.
Right.
You know, so life goes on. Well, I'm enjoying those
Mm-hmm.
understandings.
Mm-hmm. This was the cover of the book when it first
Yes,
came out.
yes. It's Junior, who was dancing with dark glasses on. He was an avid reader.
Mm.
Then Lefty, he ended up in prison and died in prison, actually. Junior just died a few months ago.
That's such a
But
great
anyway,
picture.
That's them.
Did they eventually sort of not see you? You were just kind of there?
I was their window.
Right.
You know, I didn't judge them.
Right.
I told them that if I got caught in the park doing a rumble, well, I wouldn't call the police. I will call the fire department because they come.
Right.
Yeah, and they and so I used that. I was hoping that I didn't have to witness, and I didn't want to get hurt because I was not much different than physically than them.
Right. This is a photograph of Bobby
Bobby now,
as he was just a few years ago.
Right.
Yeah. Then there were various other chapters that were covered in the book,
Yeah.
in your work.
Yeah.
There's a great group of photographs. You were a still photographer on the set of
The Misfits.
The Misfits,
–
which was a Marilyn Monroe movie.
Yeah. And several Magnum photographers signed on for that. Like
Right.
Carter Brown was there, Ernst Haas, Elliot Irwin, myself, and a couple other photographers. We each had segmented time.
Right.
And what happened was that Marilyn needed to ride a horse in a certain scene.
Right.
She had never done that before, and she got on top of on the saddle, but some little pieces of barbed wire on the ground, and the horse touched and set up a kind of thing, and he was about to fall off, and Houston and Arthur Miller ran to her and got her off the horse. I'm sitting on top of the corral,
Right.
with my Leica. And she walks by me. She said, "Did you get those pictures, Bruce?" And I said, "I don't do insurance pictures." And she gave me a big kiss. It meant a lot to me at that time.
You're still talking about
Told
it.
everybody on the set,
Right,
know, that I was I was a gentleman,
Right. Right.
so to speak.
I want to jump ahead now to the civil rights movement.
Yeah, okay.
How did you initially get involved? You'd been living in New York.
Well, that's interesting. I'm trying to remember. Yes, I had finished the Brooklyn gang, and I applied to the Guggenheim Foundation to do a series of photographs on youth today
Right.
throughout the country. And John Morris, who was a bureau chief at that time at Magnum, said that there's a group of college kids challenging civil rights.
Right.
So I went down.
Right.
And it was my first exposure to that world and that oppression.
Did you go with other photographers? You just
no,
took
I
a
went
bus
by
by
myself
yourself?
without an assignment. John took me down there, but then he left and went back to New York. And I I just went on the bus,
Right.
and I got to know some of the people, like John Lewis, for instance.
And did you take the bus to Mississippi to?
Yeah, I went to Alabama, Mississippi, and that lasted not only for the 1961 bus rides,
Mm-hmm.
but 19X. From the next 5 years, I witnessed several demonstrations and marches, and also document the people working in the fields
Right.
and homes.
Right.
And
Yeah. Let's look at a few of these.
That's early. That's
Mhm.
62.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Malcolm X
Mm-hmm.
rally.
Mm-hmm.
I walked around Harlem a lot. So the civil rights photographs sensitized me. I knew I began to know what I was looking at and what I was feeling.
Even more so than the Brooklyn gang work.
Oh yeah, that was much bigger
Right.
idea
Right.
and much more dangerous.
And therefore, did it feel also much more rewarding or much more important?
Well, I just kept through it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd use fashion to support it, but then I came to I couldn't equate fashion models and that life
Mm-hmm.
with what I was witnessing in the South. So I had a contract for fashion photography, and I went into Lieberman, who was the editor-in-chief of Vogue at the time. I said, I can't photograph both. I can't be both people. So if you allow me, I won't do any more fashion, but I will do historical, like they sent me to Iran.
Right.
You know, that was okay, but I didn't want to enter that fashion world.
Right. Right.
And stay close.
And so Vogue sent you on assignment to various places.
To foreign countries,
Right.
You know, like the Shah of Iran.
Right. Right.
And right.
How in retrospect?
And portraits also.
Yeah. In retrospect, how important was it for you to stop trying to be two people?
Yeah. Oh, it was very important. I didn't know who I was.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you did, and it was hard to not be who you were.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
These are still more from the South. Yeah.
The Mrs. Black.
This one of her house.
During the summer march, I veered off, and I came upon this woman. Actually, a reporter on the Atlantic newspaper told me about Mrs. Blackman,
Mm-hmm.
who was a sharecropper. And so I met her, and I took a picture of her and her daughter,
Mm-hmm.
1 year old or whatever that was. So 25 years later, I found these people again. And although Mrs. Blackman died, the little baby became an insurance agent helping farmers in that area.
Mm.
She doesn't live in a shack anymore, but it's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that made a round circle.
Mm-hmm.
So during the Civil Rights Sixth Act, Voting Act, the younger children were able to get a decent education
Mm-hmm.
and a life.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of those children she was a librarian.
Gotcha.
She was a librarian at the state capitol in Mobile,
Wow.
Alabama.
Yeah.
And that is something.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I do when I can and how I can go reach back into the world.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, right now, I have two amazing researchers, and they're finding Michelle. They're finding things that I forgot about or I passed over.
Right.
You know, and some of these anecdotal stories are coming up.
That's great.
There, you know.
See, I want to keep moving through some of these photos. The civil rights period for you was about, in terms of your photographic work, it was 5 or 6 years worth of projects.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was 5 years.
In your mind at this point, at working as a photographer, do you see yourself as, are you a photojournalist? Are you an editorial photographer? Are you a documentarian? Are you an artist? What's the,
All of
can,
those.
yeah, what's the terminology that's being used, and how are photographers thinking?
I'm a photographer. I take pictures.
And and when it comes to, there's this phrase that I asked you about this earlier, but the phrase a concerned photographer.
Oh yeah.
What do you think about that, or how did
I don't like labels of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because concern could also grow to be self-concern.
Right.
And I just feel that I should be doing whatever I want to do right now, when I want to do it.
But a lot of your worldview comes through in these, and I would say that there's.
Yeah, I have friends who are who can coax me, who inspire me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who understand things deeper than I need longer time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's who I am.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah.
So after the civil rights, the next big project that you embark on is another one of your very well-known projects about one particular city block in
Spanish Harlem.
up in Spanish Harlem
Yeah.
at East 100th Street.
Right.
How did that come about? How did that project start?
Well, we had a wonderful librarian at Magnum, Sam Holmes. He was an amateur trapeze artist, and that he led me into the circus.
Mm.
Then he told me one day that a relative of his, white minister living on one of the most treacherous blocks in East Harlem, where a citizens committee was starting to change things. People were taking hold. I should make contact with the minister. And I did. He said, well, I live on the street. I have 3 children that live on the street. But I can't give you permission to take pictures in the community. They've been burnt before. Okay, so I met with the Citizens Committee, which was a storefront with 13 or 14 people. And they said to me, yes, photographers have come through these communities taking poverty pictures.
Right.
And nothing changes here.
Right.
We're now organizing to help that change made. I said, well, look, let me take one picture. I'm using a 4x5 press view camera. I'm working by myself. I have a little full portfolio with me. He said, well, how can we help you then? And I said, I want a family of 10, the largest family that you know of in the community. And that's what I did. It took weeks because they weren't always there.
Right.
First time I tried it, there were 2 missing, and then there's 3 missing. The other one's coming. Okay, but it finally got 10, and I made a print, and I showed it to the committee, and they assigned an agitator, not an agitator.
You were the agitator.
He helps people
Right.
fill out their whatever they need to fill out and that kind of thing, and he protects. People see he's with me or I'm with him.
Right.
It's okay.
Right.
Today he's a film video artist in Washington.
Mm.
Anyway, Jose Rosa. So that led me around, and there's so and so in the store, and interesting. The family is beautiful, and they're working hard. So I photographed whatever appeared to me. I didn't have an agenda.
Right.
I had a camera, a tripod, a portfolio case, and a strobe.
Right.
And I would just pick up people.
And so those photographs were then used.
Pardon?
Those photographs were used.
Eventually they were used when a book came through and they could show the mayor or a businessman
Right.
what the circumcision is and how to dignify the people
Right.
and spirit, and you can sense the spirit
Right.
of the community.
What eventually happened to that neighborhood? How has that?
Well,
Because you've stayed in touch
the
over
100th
these.
Street, all the apartments are renovated, and they built a playground across the street. Later, it became a condominium.
Right.
And the Spanish Harlem that I knew was bodegas,
Right.
not hot chocolates.
Right.
So, and I went back on a fellowship for the Open Society. I went back to look to see what was going on with 100th Street, and it was too cleaned up for me. So I took some pictures, but what I did, I followed new schools, tutorial programs, women's health, all the kinds of things. I documented those, so this was the outcome of
Right.
East 100th Street, Metro North, that other venues and neighborhoods. So it really served a community.
Right.
The photographs.
Right.
And they write about it. And recently, a woman called me up. She said, "Do you know the picture of the bird in the bird cage?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's me.
Did we pass it? Yeah.
You'll probably come to it, maybe not. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's it. So she came and she spent the morning with us and telling me tearfully how that photograph meant to her and her husband so many years and so much pain coming out. She works for the VA. She's a nutritionist. So that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
About what a photograph can do and can be.
Yeah, it can illuminate and educate and.
That's right, and it can be beautiful.
Yeah. I think we're going to come next to the subway work.
Okay. Yeah.
You started traveling. You started just heading out on the subway, sometimes at night, sometimes during the day, and you told me that you did it because you said you let hunger drive you. Yeah. Was it hunger for social change, hunger for cleaning up the trains?
No, it was a hot dog in Coney Island. There's a hot dog in Coney Island that spurred me on. And it's about an hour to get there. If I can get to Nathan, that would be great. And if I don't, that would be great too.
Right.
I never got to the.
You never got to the hot dog?
No, because I saw someone on the platform going the opposite direction.
Right.
And I followed them.
Right.
So stalked them.
Right. Right. So you were the creepy guy on the platform.
I'm one of them. I had a strobe and a thing and a wedding portfolio that I would show people. If they did it with downfall.
Right.
I believe I was really a good photographer. Right. But here he has this beautiful album.
Right.
Gold trim with pictures of people he took in the subway. So that was the dynamic.
Right. And what were you looking for?
I was looking for something that was looking for me.
Explain that.
I felt that I was going into a world inside of a world.
Right.
And I really became addicted.
Right.
My wife can tell you that we can hear the subway 7 streets.
Right.
We can hear it. And I would get up like a werewolf and get dressed and have to be compelled to go. I wanted to go to 116th Street because there's a tunnel there and people sleeping there overnight. Maybe if I'm careful, I can get a picture.
Right.
Then I go back to my, what? And he'll say, "Oh, how did it go? What did you do today?" Right. I said, "Well, I went over to Double R and then I transferred to the number 6 and I went to, that." It's wonderful. We have a special wife here.
So supportive.
Yeah.
So this work, I think many of us, when I first studied this project as an undergrad, I remember it as color. I mean,
Yeah.
this is one of your most well-known color projects.
Yeah, right.
And there's a sort of like deep, somber color palette to
Right,
it.
right.
But the black and white work was something that you were making at the same time as the color, is that right? You were making it first.
Yeah, I first rode around the subway with black and white camera.
Right.
But I kept seeing the vibrancy of the color palette.
Right.
And so I stopped that and I continued the rest of the project in color.
But there is something very graphic about these black and white ones as well.
Yeah.
I want to open this up to some conversation with the audience. How does that sound?
Sure, that's fine.
Are there any questions? How many, can I ask, I want a show of hands of those who are photographers in the crowd.
Wow.
Quite a few. That's like half of you maybe. Do any of you have questions for Bruce?
Yes, sir.
I can correct you next slide, but who are some of the photographers, and you want to be one, and certainly
my mother remarried after the war, and he was commander in the Navy, and the commander of that rank were given medalist cameras. The medalist was a 2 1/4, 3 1/4 rangefinder camera, so he gave it to me. And so I started going, I was 15, I started going into Chicago by myself. I was okay, but I couldn't be later than dark, okay? So that's when I discovered the power of the image. So that sort of did it, and I grew from there.
any specific photographers that you studied?
Pardon?
How about photographers that you became aware of
Oh.
the study of the influence later?
Of course, there was Gene Smith and Cartier-Bresson in those days, but a lot of other photographers that are lesser known, you know, to answer your question. Yeah.
I've got another one here.
You have such a powerful sense of empathy. Where does that come from?
I don't know, and maybe the way we lived during the war, during the Second World War. My Uncle Herb, who was living with us when Pearl Harbor occurred, he joined the Air Force and became a bomber pilot, shot down. So we didn't, the government said that they can't find him, and for 41 days they couldn't find him. Finally, they found him. He had been rescued by a Parisian and a woman. He was only 110 pounds. A strong woman, carried him to safety. So that might have had an effect, because I remember my brother and I were told by my uncle never to look into the books. That was how the Norden bomb site was made, and that was top secret. So we would sneak up into the attic to see my Uncle Herbie's books. Anyway, so you grow. I have friends, graphic designers, friends who are poets and writers, historians. It just goes on and on. That answers your question. Yeah. But what I'm most proud of is the fact that my oldest daughter, who was a teacher, noticed that the cover of her civil rights chapter was one of my photographs.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of neat.
There's a question in the
Yeah.
back here.
When you say all this in retrospect, it looks like every time you went out, you came back with a lot of amazing photographs. Was there periods of time where you go out and people didn't stand on it, and you come back with nothing? Was there like,
Oh, you mean like you're fishing, but you couldn't?
yeah, it just looks like so many pictures came back each time you went out.
Uh-huh.
I'm wondering how
Yeah.
to deal with that.
Well,
You make it look easy. Was it hard ever?
oh, what was? If the light wasn't right, if I didn't like the light that day, I might stop photographing. If that answers your question.
Did you ever have like writer's block? Were there periods where it was hard where there wasn't a project, or you really had questions about?
Well, we have two kids in private school and college. You get busy very soon. Very busy.
You worked through it, in other words.
Yeah.
I think there's a question in the back here. What drives you, for instance, with the civil rights work? Was it a sense of purpose, or were you there sort of objectively documenting?
No, I was there. I was on the bus.
Right. You were, in it.
And we were all frightened because the route is along the trees,
Mm-hmm.
very dense trees. So any sniper would have a field day.
Mm-hmm.
And also the guard, the National Guard, they carried live ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
And these are homeboys. They're not your friend.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there were a couple of times I was arrested and that kind of thing. But basically, what sustained me is the beauty of photographic image, particularly fiber print.
Right.
I'm going through my archives now, and there are thousands of negatives and contacts and whatnot. The grain, the beauty of the image, the paper, the weight, and whatnot. I've not been able to feel that romance with digital right now.
Right. This has come up in the questions and also just in your work. You do have such a deep love for a concern and a love for humanity and understanding. You have an empathy for the situation of others and want to somehow bring that to light. How have you sustained that?
We have to be curious.
Curious. Mm-hmm.
You have to be open, and you have to return. You can't
Return to the project.
It can't be a hamburger.
Right.
It has to be a love affair with the process, and to allow you to go in. My work at the Museum of Natural History recently, I just kept going back because I changed. The object didn't change; it was there forever. But I changed my relationship to it. That's what made it so much fun. And also, I print for the last time. I won't do it anymore, but I had 50 boxes of very good photographic paper, and so I made a process and printed them myself. Now I can't do that anymore very often, but I decided to print and the way I lived, the way I always lived.
Right.
And that worked, the body of work. But so I'm looking for a new venue. I'm always looking for something.
Right. Right.
And even a certain architecture. You know what it really turns me on? New York at night, when there's nothing to see, it's black. Yeah, that really turns me on.
Any other questions? There's one over here.
Yeah. So I know you do a lot of editorial fashion work, but kind of paradoxically, if you're Brooklyn gangsters that kind of listen into the history of kind of more recognizable fashion work, could you
here.
Did you? There is a aspect to the Brooklyn gang work that has a fashion sense to it. Did you think of the project at all did you conceive of it at all as fashion?
Oh no, but the fashion.
Or in hindsight, do you think of it
No,
as?
what Lieberman called me into his office after Brooklyn Gang was published.
Alexander
And he-
Lieberman, yeah.
Yeah, and he wanted to know if I would like to do fashion. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I'd like you to take this model, Deborah Dixon, to the atomic display
Right.
and take some pictures," which I did, and they're very successful. But then I said, as I said before, it had a crossroad. I couldn't do that and be down south,
Right.
you know. I'm ready for it now. But
You're ready for.
I'm ready for
You're accepting fashion
models now,
assignments
but I
now.
wasn't.
Okay, good to know. Somebody could tweet that
Yeah,
for us.
yeah.
Maybe get you some work. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Bruce, I want to thank you so much for your time and your generosity and all of your inspiring images and your inspiring life and dedication to the medium and to the advancement of society. It's
Well,
been
I'm very moved by the way you conducted this interview,
well, it's-
and I've learned, you know, and we'll just go on.
just go on.
We'll do-
Everyone, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Strand. Thank you to Davidson. Thank you to Bruce.